"Sir, I can make your daughter walk again," the homeless boy whispered to the millionaire, causing him to freeze. There are different kinds of silence. There's the reverent silence of an old cathedral, where the air is thick with unspoken prayers. There's the peaceful silence of an early morning in the woods, when the mist still hangs between the trees. And then, there's the silence inside Jonathan Reeves' Range Rover, worth a small fortune. It isn't the absence of sound, it's a presence. The presence of a cosmic black hole, sucking away all light, all hope, all laughter that ever existed. Outside, Birmingham Children's Hospital loomed like a fortress of pain dressed in science. Its fluorescent lights had an odd ability to strip color from life itself, turning Jonathan's glossy car into a tired slab of metal, turning his Armani suit into a heavy suit of armor. He had been sitting here in this metal cocoon for 15 minutes. The engine still hummed, the AC still blew cool air, but Jonathan felt nothing. He hadn't felt in a very long time. Time, for him, was no longer measured by ticking clocks or Gregorian calendars. It was measured in sympathetic headshakes, in blurry MRI scans, and in hollow promises of future breakthroughs. He glanced into the rearview mirror, a painful habit he couldn't break. There, in the custom-made booster seat, was his entire world. Lina, 6 years old. Soft chestnut curls tucked neatly behind one ear, revealing a brilliant forehead. Tiny legs, once tireless in the garden, now lay limp beneath a faded pink blanket, the pink of worn-out dreams. Her eyes, milk chocolate brown, were wide open, but they weren't looking at anything inside the car. They looked through the ceiling, through the gray skies of Birmingham, searching for a place only she knew. She didn't speak. 18 months, 547 days, countless hours. Lina had chosen silence as her refuge. Jonathan closed his eyes, a mistake. Because behind his eyelids, the darkness was always the perfect screen for the worst film of his life, and that film always started with laughter. Lina's laughter, bright and ringing, filling the backyard. The scent of freshly cut grass and the roses his wife had planted on the trellis. He stood on the porch, phone pressed to his ear, his voice cold, shredding a 7-figure deal with a Shanghai partner. "Unacceptable, that number is an insult," he had barked. And in that very moment, from the corner of his eye, he saw Lina, in her sun-yellow dress, trying to conquer the old oak tree at the edge of the yard. Part of him, the father, almost said, "Careful, princess." But another part, the Wall Street wolf, was fixated on the number flashing on his screen. That number mattered more. And then came a sound he would never forget. A sharp crack, not the sound of a toy breaking. The sound of something living, precious, snapping. What followed wasn't a long scream, just a short gasp, then silence. The silence that began in that moment and followed him into every sleep, haunted every meal, turned his home into a museum of regret. His wealth, the god he once worshipped, had proven a powerless deity. It couldn't rewind time, not even by a second. It couldn't rebuild the fragile nerves in his daughter's T12 vertebrae. All it could buy were tools to numb his guilt. The best experts money could hire, the most advanced rehab tech, a 24/7 nursing staff, and a house so large, the echoes of silence became deafening. He, Jonathan Reeves, the man who could make entire boards tremble with a single frown, was now a beggar, begging for a twitch, a word, a sign that his baby girl was still in there, behind those hollow eyes. Guilt wasn't a burden, it was an organ. A malignant tumor growing out from his heart, poisoning every thought he had. Across the street, separated from the world of luxury cars and tailored suits, another existence played out. A boy sat on a sun-bleached cardboard box beside an overflowing public trash bin. To most people, He was part of the scenery, invisible like a crack in the pavement or a faded graffiti tag. He wore an oversized puffer jacket despite the mild weather, faded jeans, and boots held together by layers of black duct tape. In his lap was a spiral notebook, its cover worn soft from too much handling. But this boy Mike wasn't part of the background. He was a watcher. He wasn't dazzled by the Range Rover's shine or the Armani label. He saw the things others missed. He saw how the man's shoulders slumped under invisible weight. He saw how he looked in the mirror, not to check traffic, but to check if his soul was still there. Mike saw a man drowning in a sea of tears only he could see. The boy was an anthropologist of sorrow. That night, inside the sprawling mansion on Crestview Hill, sleep was an unwelcome guest. Jonathan couldn't sleep. He paced back and forth in his study, a room designed to project power and success. Dark walnut walls, Italian leather chairs, a desk so large it could serve as a runway for small dreams. Contemporary paintings worth tens of thousands adorned the walls. Everything was perfect. Everything was orderly. Every detail, a testament to a life meticulously controlled. But tonight, all that luxury felt meaningless. It was a gilded prison, and Jonathan was the inmate, pacing the cell of his own design. He wasn't thinking about the Shanghai Stock Exchange or the board meeting scheduled for the morning. He was thinking about a boy in patched-up shoes. His rational mind, precision instrument sharpened by 1,000 deals, screamed that this was utter stupidity. It presented every logical scenario. The boy was bait in a scam targeting wealthy, desperate families. The boy was mentally ill, lost in his own delusional world. Or worse, the boy was cruel, thriving on false hope, only to delight in watching it crumble. All these scenarios were plausible. In the world Jonathan knew, they were almost expected. But there was another part of him. A part he had long buried beneath layers of success and guilt. And that part refused to stay silent. That part was a father. A father who used to read fairy tales to his daughter every night. A father who once believed in magic. That part whispered, "What if? What if there's a 0.01% chance? What if the world still holds something beyond the iron logic of balance sheets?" That part didn't care about risk. Because when you've already lost what's most precious, what more do you have to lose? The study door creaked. Jonathan turned. Lina was there, sitting in her wheelchair at the doorway. She had wheeled herself from the bedroom alone through the dark house. Her eyes were no longer empty. They were fixed on him, pleading. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "The boy ... double." She paused, searching for words. His eyes don't lie. Jonathan felt like he'd been punched in the gut. He froze. A full sentence. A thought. A declaration. His daughter, who had lived in silence for so long, was speaking to defend the promise of a stranger. He knelt in front of her, lowering himself to her eye level. He wanted to be strong, but his voice trembled. How do you know that, princess?" Lina didn't answer right away. She raised her tiny hand not to her head, but to the center of her chest. "Here," she whispered. "I felt it, like ... an old song I'd forgotten. But today, I heard the melody again." And that's when the last wall of Jonathan Reeves' logic collapsed. He could argue with the greatest minds in the world. He could argue with irrefutable data. He could argue with himself. But he could not and would not argue with his daughter's feeling. The instinct of a child is sometimes more honest than all the truths of adults. The next day, Jonathan didn't go to the office. He didn't take Lina to the hospital either. He drove alone back to that street. He didn't get out of the car. He parked discreetly, watching. Mike was still there, sitting on his box, writing in his notebook. He wasn't looking around. He didn't seem to be waiting for a mark. He was simply there, existing in his own space, an island of stillness in the rush of the world. There was a strange consistency about the boy. After a moment's hesitation, Jonathan stepped out. It felt like walking a tightrope between skyscrapers. One side, his world of logic, safety, and despair. The other, a world of uncertainty, irrationality, but also the tiniest flicker of hope. He walked toward Mike. Each step felt like lead. "Why my daughter?" Jonathan asked bluntly. No contempt in his voice now, just confusion. "You saw an expensive car and thought it was your big chance?" He had to ask. He needed to rule out the worst-case scenario. Mike looked up, his eyes clear and calm. He closed his notebook gently. "I didn't see the car, sir," he said. "I saw how you held her, like you were trying to keep the pieces of a shattered vase together after it fell, afraid to drop even the smallest shard." The words hit Jonathan like a hammer to the soul. This boy didn't look with his eyes. He saw with something deeper. "I don't want your money," Mike added, as if he could hear the chaos in Jonathan's mind. "My mom, Monique, she never worked for money. She said healing isn't a transaction, it's a gift. When you give care, you don't get paid in cash. You see a light return in someone's eyes. That's the real reward." "Your mother... where is she now?" Jonathan asked, his voice softer. He no longer saw the boy as a nuisance, but as a mystery waiting to be understood. Mike's eyes grew distant, gazing somewhere Jonathan couldn't reach. "She's gone to her star," he said. She had been ill, a sickness even her gifted hands couldn't heal. But until the end, she held Mike's hand and taught him to listen. Not with ears, but with hands, with heart. She said every body has its own song. Sometimes it falls out of rhythm, and the healer's job is to help it find its melody again. A long silence fell between them. The honking cars and chattering pedestrians felt like they belonged to another planet. Here, on this dusty sidewalk, it was just a broken man and a child carrying the legacy of healing. Jonathan felt the armor he had worn for years peeling away, piece by piece. "What do you want?" he finally asked. Not a challenge, a genuine invitation. Mike drew a deep breath, summoning courage. "1 hour," he said. "Just 1 hour. In a place without antiseptic smells or white walls. Somewhere with trees, fresh air. Harrington Park. It's close. Tomorrow at noon. You, me, and Lina. If after 1 hour, you still think I'm just some kid making things up, I promise I'll disappear. You'll never hear from me again." Jonathan stared at the boy. This was a gamble. A completely irrational one. He'd be placing his daughter's last fragile hope, his own, in the hands of a stranger with nothing but an old notebook and strange wisdom. But then he no longer saw a street kid. He saw a legacy. He heard Lina's voice in his mind. "I felt it." "Harrington Park," Jonathan said, voice dry but certain. "Noon tomorrow. Don't be late." He turned away, afraid to look back, afraid he'd see an illusion disappear. As he drove off, he glanced into the rearview mirror. Mike was still standing there, small, alone, in the crowd. But he didn't look lost. He looked like a lighthouse. Still and steady, radiating quiet strength. Ready to guide lost ships through stormy seas. Jonathan didn't realize it yet, but he had just wagered not on a whisper, but on the entire future of his family. And for the first time in a very long time, he didn't feel afraid. He felt something else. Something very much like life. Harrington Park wasn't the kind of place people came to for beauty. It was a space forgotten by time, a neglected chapter in the Book of Birmingham. The basketball court was a web of cracks, like a giant spider had spun its sorrow into the asphalt, and the rusted hoops had long forgotten the feel of a ball swishing through them. A few lonely swings creaked out a haunting lullaby whenever the wind passed, like the tired sighs of fading childhood memories. The grass grew in stubborn patches, valiantly trying to hold back the invasion of weeds. This was a place of abandonment, and maybe that's why it became the perfect stage for something unbelievable. A space for the forgotten, like the feeling of earth beneath bare feet to finally be remembered. When Jonathan's silver SUV rolled into the parking lot at 12:07, Mike was already there. He wasn't sitting on a cardboard box like he had at the hospital. He sat on a wooden bench beneath the wide branches of an ancient oak tree, the only tree in the park that still looked full of life. Beside him, there was no clutter, no mess, only the neatness of someone who respected his task. A small gym bag rested precisely by his feet. A clean terry cloth towel folded into quarters lay evenly across the bench. He didn't check the time, didn't fidget or look nervous. He was simply waiting, with the kind of patience that felt eternal, like he and the oak had made a pact with time itself. Jonathan turned off the engine. He took a deep breath. He felt ridiculous. Jonathan Reeves, the man whose calendar was scheduled down to the minute, the man who once flew to London just for lunch, now standing in a rundown park to meet a nobody kid. He pushed Lina's wheelchair across the uneven grass, each turn of the wheels stirring doubt in his chest. Arms crossed, he wore his defensiveness like armor, an old habit. He had braced himself for disappointment. Disappointment was familiar. It was safer than hope. "Hello, sir," Mike said politely, his voice calm. Then he turned to Lina and gave her a quiet, genuine smile. "Hi, Lina." Lina, who had been silent the entire drive, unexpectedly lifted her hand in a tiny wave. Barely noticeable, but to Jonathan, it was an earthquake. She was engaging. Voluntarily. "So what now?" Jonathan snapped, his voice defensive, almost mocking. "How does the show begin? Magic carpet? Or a secret healing chant?" Mike ignored the sarcasm completely. It didn't touch him. He opened his gym bag. Inside, no potions, no talismans. Just ordinary items. A pair of thick wool socks. A worn-out tennis ball. A small jar of cocoa butter, the kind you can find at any pharmacy. And a muslin pouch filled with something warm, probably rice. The healer's toolkit, apparently. It looked more like a grandma's drawer than a medical kit. "These are the things my mom used," Mike explained, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "The rice holds heat, helps muscles relax. The ball finds pressure points, wakes up sleeping nerves. The cocoa butter keeps the skin from drying when I massage." Then he turned to Lina, and something shifted. The stern responsibility of a grown-up vanished. What took its place was gentleness, respect. He didn't talk to Lina like a patient. He spoke to her like a fellow traveler. "Hey, Lina," he said, kneeling so their eyes were level. "Is it okay if I work with your legs a little today? I promise nothing will hurt. The moment you feel even a little uncomfortable, just say, 'Stop,' and we'll stop. You're the boss, all right?" Lina looked up at her dad. Her wide eyes asked the question her lips didn't. Jonathan, torn between logic and this tiny sprout of hope, finally nodded grudgingly. "Careful," he muttered. Mike didn't take that as permission. He took it as trust. He got to work not like a therapist, but like an artisan approaching a fragile masterpiece. Gently, he removed the pink blanket, revealing Lina's small, pale legs. They looked forgotten, almost alien to the vibrant spirit inside her. But Mike didn't look at them with pity. He looked with focus. With respect, he placed the warm rice pouch on her thighs. She flinched slightly. "Too hot?" Mike asked quickly, full of concern. Lina shook her head. Then softly, Warm. I like it. Mike nodded and waited. No rushing. He knew healing wasn't a race, it was a slow dance. He let the warmth seep in, working its way into forgotten muscle fibers, coaxing life back into sleeping tissue. Then he started to move her legs, tiny circular motions at the ankles, gentle flexes of the knees. Nothing forced. Every movement was a conversation, not a command. Jonathan stood there, arms crossed tighter, ready to intervene. But nothing bad happened. Quite the opposite. There was a strange peace to the way Mike worked, a harmony between his hands and Lina's body. He wasn't fighting the paralysis. He was listening to it. Have you ever dreamed of running, Lina? Mike asked suddenly, voice low and warm, while his hands gently massaged her calf. Lina blinked, startled by the question. Yes, she whispered. I dreamed I was chasing a blue butterfly in the garden. Same here, Mike grinned. Except I was chasing a chocolate-covered donut. Lina let out a soft, crystal-clear laugh. And for Jonathan, it was thunder cracking open a sky that had been gray for 18 months. He dropped his arms. The first cracks in his defenses had appeared. Mike kept talking to Lina, and his questions were strange. He didn't ask, does this hurt? He asked, what does that cloud look like to you? He didn't ask, can you feel this? He asked, if your legs had names, what would you call them? He was reconnecting Lina to her body, not as broken machinery, but as a long-lost friend. He was healing her spirit before he even touched the physical. After about 30 minutes, Mike tapped lightly on Lina's ankle with a knuckle. Can you feel anything now? Lina stayed quiet, her eyes shut, listening for something far away inside herself. A little, she said at last. Like an echo. When you tapped, I felt a tiny buzz. Here, she pointed to her knee. Good, Mike said firmly, looking up at Jonathan. Very good. That's a start. Jonathan crossed his arms tighter again, trying to lock down a feeling he didn't want to name. She sometimes feels pressure during therapy sessions too, he said, downplaying it. Yes, Mike replied evenly. But those sessions are in small rooms full of machines and white walls. Sometimes the body is afraid of machines. It pulls back. But here, he spread his arms wide toward the trees, the open sky, the oak. Here, the body feels safe enough to tell its story. The first session ended. No miracles. Lina couldn't move her legs on command. But as Jonathan lifted her back into the car, something fundamental had changed. Lina wasn't looking at the sky anymore. She looked at him, and she smiled. A real smile. And in that moment, Jonathan knew that no matter what the outcome, he had done something right. Miracles, like dandelion seeds in the wind, have a natural tendency to drift and take root in the most unexpected places. The miracle of a single toe moving in Harrington Park was no exception. It didn't begin with a sensational headline, but with a whisper. A whisper from a nurse named Brenda, who had a habit of walking her golden retriever through the park every Sunday morning. She knew Lina Reeves well, or at least the image of her. The sad-eyed girl in the sleek wheelchair, a quiet echo of hospital corridors and unspoken pain. But this Sunday, something was different. The girl was smiling, a real radiant smile. And Brenda, even from a distance, swore she saw the impossible. The girl's toe moved. At first, she thought it was a trick of the light. But then she saw the father, usually so stoic, so closed off, collapse onto the grass and weep like a child. That wasn't an illusion. Brenda recounted the story over lunch at the hospital break room, with the fervor of someone who had witnessed a supernatural event. Most shrugged it off, chalked it up to sentimentality or mistaken perception. But one physical therapist, who had worked with Lina before, listened intently. He knew the case, knew how bleak the prognosis had been. A few days later, in the hallway, he ran into Jonathan. I heard, "Lina's had some progress," he asked carefully. "Is it true, Mr. Reeves?" Jonathan, who just weeks earlier would have dismissed the question as an intrusion, looked the therapist in the eye and nodded, slowly but firmly. "It's true," he said, his voice free of defensiveness. "Thanks to someone we never expected." Once verified, that whisper became a current and underground stream. It flowed through the hospital hallways, waiting rooms, and most powerfully, into online parent support groups. Those digital sanctuaries where moms and dads of chronically ill children shared their grief, their rage, and the most fragile flickers of hope. In that world, an unverified miracle was more precious than gold. The phrase "the boy at Harrington Park" began to surface. No name, no photo, just the beginning of a legend. The next Sunday, when Jonathan and Lina returned to the park, they weren't alone. 2 other families stood nearby, close to the bench beneath the oak tree. They looked awkward, uncertain, like pilgrims at a sacred site. They weren't sure they were allowed to enter. One family had a boy named Leo, around 7, walking with a metal frame. The other had a girl named Sarah, recovering from a stroke that had weakened her left side. The parents all wore the same look, a look Jonathan recognized instantly, because he had worn it himself for the past 18 months. That aching blend of hope and despair, doubt and desperate prayer. When Mike arrived, same oversized coat, same battered duffel bag, he paused. He noticed the strangers. Looked to Jonathan, a silent question in his eyes. Jonathan stepped forward, lowered his voice. "You don't have to do this," he said gently. "Our deal was just for Lina." Mike adjusted his strap, a familiar motion. He looked at Leo struggling with his walker. He looked at Sarah, trying to hide her unmoving hand. Then he looked at Lina. She was looking back, not with jealousy, but with unwavering trust. "I want to," Mike said simply. "My mom used to say, healing isn't something you hoard. It's like a candle. You light another with it, and your own flame doesn't grow dimmer." That day, Harrington Park became an open-air clinic, a classroom for hope. Mike, with the wisdom of someone far older than his years, divided his time masterfully. He began with Lina, their familiar rituals. Then, he turned to Leo. He didn't speak to the parents first. He knelt before the boy, looked him in the eye. "This frame looks cool," he said. "But I bet your legs are even cooler. Want to wake them up together?" He showed Leo's mom how to warm the rice bag, how to find pressure points behind the knees. No complicated jargon. Just, his legs aren't broken. They're just lost. We're drawing them a map. Meanwhile, another miracle was unfolding. Lina, once the healed, had become the healer. She wheeled herself toward Sarah, who was curled up in embarrassment. "Don't be scared," Lina said, voice steady with experience. "He isn't hurt. Sometimes he tells really bad jokes. But his hands are warm." From a distance, Jonathan watched. He felt something tighten in his chest, a pride so overwhelming, it hurt. His daughter, once robbed of the ability to walk, was now teaching others how to take their first steps. The week after, 5 families came, then 11. Harrington Park at noon on Sundays was no longer forgotten. It became a destination, a pilgrimage. A pastor from a nearby church began bringing folding chairs. A deli owner, whose grandson had cerebral palsy, started delivering bagels and coffee every week for free. Someone no one knew who printed simple flyers and pinned them to community boards. Free movement class, Sundays at Harrington Park, all are welcome. They had become a tribe, a congregation of the broken. They came, carrying the shards of their lives, their barely burning hopes, and laid them at the roots of an old oak tree. And there, a boy with listening hands and a heart free of judgment helped piece them back together, not into what they had once been, but into something new, something forged in kindness and shared. All the while, Jonathan wasn't just standing by, he was acting. He hired the best private investigator not to violate Mike's privacy, but to understand. What he discovered made his heart ache. Monique Carter, a brilliant but uncertified physical therapist, had spent her life running a free clinic for the poorest in the city. Her clinic had been shut down by red tape and lack of funding. Months later, she died of cancer. No insurance, no savings. All she left behind for her son was a journal and a legacy of compassion. Mike had become an orphan, drifting through shelters and streets, clutching the only treasure his mother left him. That notebook wasn't just a guide to therapy, it was her voice. It was her heart. That evening, after another Sunday in the now bustling park, Jonathan saw Mike sitting quietly on the front steps of their home, so small, so fragile under the weight he carried. "Mike," Jonathan said, voice raw. He'd rehearsed this all week. "Would you like a room of your own?" Mike looked up, eyes wide and guarded. He had learned the hard lesson of the streets. Nothing is free. Kindness was often the most elaborate trap. "What do you mean?" he asked. "At my house," Jonathan said. "This house is too big, too quiet. There's a guest room upstairs. It's got a real bed, a desk. You can stay, as long as you like." Mike looked down at his dirt-stained hands, his patched-up shoes. He stepped back instinctively. "Kids like me, we don't stay in rooms like that." Jonathan stepped forward. And for the first time, he did something he'd never done. He placed a hand on Mike's shoulder, a touch gentle but steady. "There's no such thing as kids like you, Mike," he said. "There's only you. And your place is here, if you want it." Mike didn't answer right away. He stood there for a long moment, torn between street-learned caution and the aching desire for a home. Finally, he nodded, barely. A nod almost too small to see. That night, Mike slept in a bed with clean sheets and a real mattress for the first time in over a year. And Jonathan, walking past the door, paused when he heard it. Breathing, steady, peaceful. He realized he hadn't just invited a boy into his home. He had invited hope, life, and a part of his own soul that had long gone missing. The house was no longer a tomb. It had begun to sound like family. It had been 9 Sundays since that first day in Harrington Park. 9 weeks of picnic blankets on the grass, of warm rice bags, of laughter and tears. 9 weeks of small victories shared by strangers who had become something even closer than family. They were a congregation held together not by faith in a God, but by faith in a boy's kindness and their own perseverance. But on this 10th Sunday, something felt different. From the very morning, there was a peculiar stillness in the air. The sky was clearer. The leaves of the old oak rustled with a slower rhythm, as if they too were waiting. Even Lina, on the ride to the park, was unusually quiet. But it wasn't the silence of sadness or resignation. It was the focused calm of a mountain climber before the final ascent. The stillness of an artist before the final brushstroke. She was preparing for something big. When they arrived, a small crowd was already gathered. But they weren't loud or restless. They sat or stood on folding chairs, forming a wide circle around the familiar bench beneath the oak. There were new physical therapists, drawn by word of mouth, curious neighbors, members of the congregation, their eyes filled with hope, encouragement. They hadn't come for a show. They'd come to witness. Mike arrived in his usual quiet way. He said nothing to the crowd, just nodded to a few familiar faces and walked straight to Lina. No warm-ups. He knelt down in front of her, looked her straight in the eyes and gave her a look, one look that said everything. Trust, encouragement, a single question. "Are you ready?" Lina didn't smile. She nodded. The nod of a warrior. Jonathan rolled the wheelchair away, leaving a patch of grass open. Mike didn't bring rice bags or tennis balls today. He knelt in front of Lina and placed his hands gently on her knees. "Just like we practiced, Lina," he said, voice soft but firm, just loud enough for her and Jonathan. "We'll help you stand. The rest is yours." Jonathan moved behind Lina, heart pounding loud in his chest. He crouched down, his hands ready beneath her arms. He could feel the tension in her body. "Whenever you're ready," Mike whispered. Lina closed her eyes. The entire park held its breath. 1 second, 2, she inhaled deeply, and pushed. Jonathan lifted. Mike held her knees steady, and then, a miracle. Not sudden, not explosive, but one built on thousands of tiny movements, tens of thousands of words of encouragement, and one unshakable belief. Lina stood, on her own 2 feet. Her legs trembled like leaves in the wind. Her arms stretched out for balance. Her entire body was a symphony of effort. But she was standing. No wheelchair, no walker. Just her and the earth beneath her. The crowd froze in stunned silence. Hands flew to mouths. A young mother burst into tears. Lina slowly opened her eyes. She looked down at her legs as if seeing old friends who had just returned from far away. Then she looked up. A radiant smile, full of triumph, burst across her face. "I'm standing," she said, wonder in her voice. Mike blinked quickly, pushing back something welling in his eyes. "Yes," he said hoarsely. "You are." Jonathan stood frozen, forgetting to breathe. He wanted to grab her, afraid she'd fall. But something deep inside told him this was hers. He stepped back. Lina held steady. He shook his head in disbelief. She's doing it," he whispered to Mike. Mike stepped back too, leaving Lina the full stage. "She always could," he replied. "Today, she just decided to show the world." And then Lina, because she was 6, because she had fought the dark and no longer feared anything, did the impossible. She lifted her right foot, a slow, deliberate motion, and set it down. 1 step, wobbly, imperfect, but hers. Then her left. 2. The park exploded with joy. Cheers, applause, weeping, all a chorus of pure emotion. Step 3. Then, like a warrior who had completed her mission, she fell. Straight into the waiting arms of her father. Jonathan held her close, spinning, burying his face in her hair, breathing in the scent of the miracle. He laughed and cried. Tears hot and endless. "You did it," he whispered in her ear. Over and over. "You really did it, my little princess." In his arms, Lina turned toward Mike, still sitting quietly in the grass, smiling gently. "You said I could do it," she beamed. Mike shook his head. "I said we'd try," he replied. "You're the one who did it." That afternoon, no one rushed to leave the park. They stayed. They shared stories. They hugged. Those who had once been strangers were now a family bound by an unforgettable Sunday afternoon. Mike sat on the bench, quietly observing it all. He didn't need the attention. His joy came from seeing others find theirs. That night, in the warm kitchen of the house on Crestview Hill, Jonathan leaned against the counter, watching Mike carefully pour cereal into a bowl. The silence between them was no longer awkward or distant. It was the silence of understanding, of comfort. "You know," Jonathan began, his voice still raw with emotion, "you changed everything." Mike didn't look up. He simply nodded. "I know." Jonathan stepped forward and placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. A narrow shoulder, but one that had carried a world. "My daughter walked today," he said. "Not because of a multi-million-dollar hospital. Not because of a world-renowned surgeon. Not because of some miracle drug. She walked because a kid with nothing in his hands, except his mother's heart, decided to show up. Again and again. Even when no one asked. Even when no one believed." Mike looked up. That's what my mom would have done. Jonathan's throat tightened. I wish she could be here to see it. A faint smile, mysterious and calm, appeared on Mike's lips. She did, he said. I think. She sees everything. Jonathan wiped a tear away. Mike, he said. And this time, his voice wasn't that of a CEO or a benefactor, but that of a father. You're going to change a lot of lives. Mike looked him in the eye. His eyes now held not just clarity, but an old soul wisdom. Not going to, the boy said. I already am. There are people in this world who don't carry polished degrees, or perfect resumes, or spotless pasts. But they carry something far more powerful. A heart that does not judge. A persistence that does not tire. And a reason to keep going. Sometimes, the most broken among us hold the tools to help others heal. Miracles aren't events that defy the laws of nature. Maybe miracles are the laws of kindness. It's a boy who shares the only gift he has. It's a father who learns to let go of control and learns to trust. It's a community that discovers their greatest strength doesn't come from perfection, but from holding one another through the broken pieces. If this story touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Share it. And if you know a boy like Mike or a girl like Lina out there, tell them this. You matter. Your presence is needed. And your step, no matter how small, can change the world. Thank you for joining us on this heartfelt journey. If Eliza's story touched your heart, if it gave you a little inspiration to see the world with more kindness, then don't hesitate to like this video and share it with someone you love. And most importantly, subscribe to Dramatic Stories and hit the bell icon. Because here, we believe that every story holds the power to change something. And we have so many more meaningful stories waiting to be told. Let's keep spreading the good. We'll see you in the next video.